Good. Okay. 2 o'clock, we'll officially start this third meeting of the Mayor's Housing Partnerships Task Force. I want to thank all of you for attending virtually. Interestingly enough, our task force meeting in March was the very first city meeting that was canceled because of COVID-19. So I think there's a fair bit of significance to us now meeting again under much different circumstances, but I think probably an ever more pressing need to deal with housing, because I'm quite confident the impact of COVID-19, one of those impacts will be, I suspect, an increased demand or need for affordable and supportive housing. So I believe we're on the right track. And I know at our meeting in March, we were poised to hear from our subgroups and to start to make some really significant progress. So we'll get back on track today. And so again, thank you very much for being here. And so, Madam Clerk, if you please call the roll. Let's find out who's here today.
All right, Mayor Bailey. Will Bouma. Dan Brooks.
I am here for Will Bouma, MPP.
So that's Milan.
Thanks, Milan. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I couldn't unmute in time.
That's okay. Jennifer Canning. Graham Kubit.
Here.
Mayor Davis.
I'm here.
Natasha Dobler.
Here.
Lorianne Gagnon.
It's Gagne. And yes,
Gagne, I'm sorry, Lori.
That's okay. Hello, everyone.
Odette Gomes.
So Lorianne, work on that Brantford panel is hover over it and type your name in.
I didn't put that in there. I don't know how that got there, but hey.
Well, you can change it. You can change it easily.
How do you do that? Because I didn't put that in there.
Yeah, you just hover over it with your mouse and you'll be able to type. It'll allow you to type into it. So, sorry, Madam Clerk, I interrupted you. I think you were with
Odette.
Yes, Odette.
Chief Hill. Councillor Howes.
Here.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Councillor.
Andy Joseph.
Here.
Don Lee.
Here.
MP McColeman.
Yes, I see Teresa Percival.
Oh, Teresa's here. Good.
Yeah.
Councillor McCreary.
Okay.
Lori McIntyre.
Here.
Lori, can you update your Brantford panelists to say your name, please?
Sure.
Just hover over. Just hover over it. David Prang. Gotcha.
Here. Present.
That's
Present.
Brian Sibley
Here.
and Councillor Weaver.
I'm present.
Thank you.
Oh,
That's all.
great. Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. So I just want to remind you, this is our first meeting virtually. So we do have a couple of rules to facilitate our meeting and to make it more efficient. So I'd ask that if you're not speaking to please hit the mute button to mute yourself. And then of course, when you're speaking, remember to hit the mute button, because if you don't, we'll remind you. All web cameras should remain turned on. If you step away for a minute, please leave your web camera on. We'll bring staff in as and when required, should there be any questions from members or when they're making presentations. And so this is important. When we have a large group like this that is more than one computer screen, the gallery view, it's really helpful to me if you want to speak to go into that participants box and push that raised hand button. And then that's what I'll look at when I'm calling out for questions or comments. And so if you're just raising your hand, I may not recognize you. In the event that there is an interruption, because of the internet connection, we try and reconnect within 15 minutes. If we can't, the meeting's automatically adjourned. And the way we do voting on these task forces with a large group is it's kind of by general consensus. And normally what I do, and that's by raising your hand, not hitting that participant's raised hand button. And normally what I do is I'll ask if anybody is opposed. I do that first. You'd raise your hand, and then I just declare that everyone else, by assumption, is voting in favor of it. Just makes it a little bit easier with a larger group. And so all we ask for is your patience. It's every task force I've had where we're meeting the first time on virtual, there's always a little hiccup, but that's fine. We'll work through it. Although I suspect many of us now have a lot of experience through Zoom. So first of all, declaration of pecuniary interest. Is there anyone who has a pecuniary interest they want to declare? You do it by raising your hand. And I'll just flip through the gallery. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. All right, so we'll move on then to items for consideration on our agenda. Because we don't have any delegations. So at this point, we have a lot of team updates and talking about next steps. Because recall that the second last meeting we had, I wasn't able to make it, I think chaired by Councillor Weaver. So we broke into those subgroups. The subgroups went out to do their homework, and our meeting in March was canceled. That was when the subgroups would come back to us and report to us and talk about what they've learned, some of their thoughts, and what their action plan might be. So let's start with 4.11. That's the inventories and mapping team. This is a presentation that's going to come to us from Kevin O'Hara, who's the manager of our housing program. I saw it, there's Kevin. And so this is remember at the meeting we were talking about, so what's the land inventory out there? What is it that could be available for housing, supportive and affordable housing? So Kevin, take it away.
Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. So the Inventories and Mapping project team met on Friday, June 5th to discuss those properties that are vacant municipal land in the city as well as the county. And our purpose is to also work with nonprofit groups to map any other potential land for housing, and to also look at the demographics around those pieces of land to see what's more suitable for the type of housing that should be built in those areas, access to amenities, schools, and such. So we were able to attend. We did have myself, Mary Ellen McClellan, Lucy from planning, Joelle from finance, Brad from planning, and Pam from the county attended. And I was selected as chair, so hence I'm presenting today. We did have a couple of regrets from members of the community that weren't able to attend. So basically we talked about what is the existing land that we've already have projects funded for or scheduled for, and Marlene Avenue was mentioned, of course, because it's built, and that's great. There is some other land in that location that's available as well. We talked about the case home, or the compact, affordable, sustainable, and efficient home that's going to go in on Sturton and Stinson. We also talked about the land in the county, Trillium Way, as well as land on Shellard Lane that is planned to begin in 2023. And then, of course, our current capital plan also calls for, at least for the city, for something else to be built up in around 2027, but we have no land identified for that. So hence the work of this group is really critical. So to help with that, at least, I know that representatives from planning for the city as well as for the county, we're going to review housing site maps and the housing sites for potential locations that could be available for affordable housing. And for the city, Brad Jolie was able to provide some of that information. And I'm not sure, I think Brad, you mentioned that you would be able to speak to those today. Is that okay? Is Brad here?
Brad's not here, Kevin.
Oh, Lucy?
planning it. So Joe?
Hi.
Joe?
Uh, Good afternoon, Mayor Davis and members of the task force. Lucy does send her regrets. She's not in the office this week. So yes, Brad was able to scope down a list of approximately 11 sites within the city that are all city owned. I had one of my planners look at those particular sites that were mapped out for us. And we're just almost in the last throes of finalizing a chart that was prepared, identifying constraints, pros and cons with each one in terms of servicing existing
You're breaking up, Joe. I think your internet connection is.
designation in the OP, as well as almost complete, and we'll be providing that to. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you broke up there. We can hear you now and see you now.
Okay, great. So we've shortlisted those 11 sites and identified constraints, pros and cons with each one, with respect to servicing, OP designation, and zoning. And then we will be providing that to Kevin and his group, and have some further discussions in that regard.
Yeah, we've lost you again.
Well, that's great, though. I think it's a great summary for you, Mr. Mayor. Joe was talking about those sites that are available, and planning did commit to mapping and identifying those lands to look at how the official plan could be reviewed in its new capacity, the new official plan, how it can allow for greater flexibility of density and removing some of the zoning barriers that will be charted by that group. And then Pam from the County of Brant was also working on a mapping the potential available land there, and identified that the county might have approximately 13 potential locations. And I'm not sure if Pam is able to provide any more detail on that. She didn't have it in time for that meeting, but she mentioned that there might be some information available today. So is Pam here? There, Pam.
Sure.
Yeah, hi.
Yep. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so the county is in the same position as the city. We're going through our inventory. It's shrinking down from our original 13 sites, so it's looking more like 6 or so. We're having, some of those are in the agricultural lands, so they're not appropriate. Some don't have servicing, so they're not appropriate either. So we are working on a mapping exercise, going through our zoning and our OP designation, and we'll have that ready for the next meeting of the Mapping and Inventories Committee.
Thanks, Pam.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the team still has to have that task of reaching out to those nonprofit faith groups, other agencies about potential development lands that might be green spaces in the community next to faith communities, or faith communities that are looking for redevelopment. That is another opportunity for nonprofit development, but the team still has to work on a method to reach out to those groups. Potentially a consultant may be helpful in that area. We've talked a little bit about that. And then of course that idea of mapping around the areas that are identified through the process of the mapping that is already being undertaken by planning staff, both for the county and the city, and looking at what are the conveniences, what are the opportunities in those neighborhoods, so that if affordable housing is placed there, a mix of affordable housing with market rent as well as affordable market rents, making sure there's conveniences and that they are in appropriate locations for the population that are to be served. So our next steps is to meet again either the week of June 22nd or 29th. I can't recall when we scheduled that for, but we're planning our next meeting following today's task force meeting, and we'll go from there and be happy to report back as things develop.
Yeah, because Kevin, I would anticipate that we want to move this along, and I'm anticipating that if we're not meeting in July, certainly meeting in August, I would hope that we're meeting, like I said, if not every month, as we move along here, but certainly, certainly every 60 days. I guess we'll figure that out later. But so the goal is to have this sort of comprehensive mapping and inventory that would be of benefit to the city, county, human services department that oversees some of the housing developments that we project we can do. How might it also be helpful to other groups, organizations?
Well, through you, Mr. Mayor, at least for the city and the county sites, if it could be explored in terms of potential RFPs for exploration of additional supportive housing or additional nonprofit housing that might be developed if either municipality would contribute land and other organizations could respond to an expression of interest or an RFP in developing new affordable housing and providing that service in the community. It adds to the inventory of affordable housing that is needed under our municipal housing master plan. And then as well, for other nonprofit groups or just private developers in the community that are interested in providing affordable housing, that extra layer of looking at those green spaces that might be connected with existing municipal, not municipal, but community nonprofits or churches or faith groups, having those inventories available so that if developers approach us from the private sector looking again for affordable housing development, we can point to a sector and say, hey, this faith group has land and would be willing to enter into a partnership and try to provide more affordable housing for the community with us.
Right, and how will we do that shout out or reach out to, as you say, it could be a faith-based organization that's got some excess land or some other organization that is thinking, why don't we try and do something with this land? How are we going to reach out and capture and get that information?
Well, to be honest, Mr. Mayor, I don't have a clear answer for that. We do have to, again, I think, look to how we can get the word out and make those calls and let the community know, perhaps through an expression of interest or through a mapping exercise through a consultant on how we communicate with those groups. We can certainly canvass those communities and provide introductory letters and information pamphlets about the need for affordable housing. But in the absence of those groups coming forward, which they sometimes do in other communities that I know of, none have so far.
Yeah, okay. So I'll throw it, I've got a lot of questions. A lot of people have raised their hands. Thank you, Kevin. We've got some questions for you coming up, starting with Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if we're truly looking at a housing continuum of how we're going to support folks. So when we're looking at land and the land usage and what's available to us, I think we're looking at it from a municipal perspective. Does it have water? Does it have sewage? Does it have all those requirements? But I think if we're really going to make an impact on the housing continuum, I think we need to be a bit more flexible than that. And for example, if folks have seen the article from Kitchener-Waterloo where it talked about the cabins, so that's really something that we couldn't put on city land because of all the requirements we're following. But I think there's opportunities to partner with groups to maybe assist that type of housing to move forward, and particularly over winter shelter. That would be where the concern is. So just when we're looking at the lands that are available, for instance, Pam had mentioned that there was, I think it was 16 in the county, but some of them were agricultural and some of them weren't appropriate. I would just like to make sure that we're looking at that with the lens of, the entire housing continuum. So, not only looking at the folks that are on our waiting list, but also the folks that are currently homeless, that are currently in our shelters, and having that transitional housing available. The cost associated with building a Marlene Ave for all of those folks, that's going to take a long time and a lot of money. So I really think we need to think out of the box when we're looking at the land and what we can actually use that land for.
Thank you, Councillor Weaver. Lori-Ann, you're up next.
Sorry, 2 seconds to unmute. Thank you, Mayor Davis. I wanted to get to the heart of your question. How do we reach out? How do we reach out? And I'm not sure if folks had a chance to review the actual mentorship team report that we sent back, but we link to this inventories mapping exercise because, and I'm going to have to amend my report before I get into it a little bit, wasn't understanding that that particular group was only mapping land. I really think you need to map alongside it the providers and the support agencies. We should, Brantford should have some idea of who those social service providers are and the nonprofit housing providers. For example, Hamilton's housing and homelessness plan specifically lists the number. There are X number of nonprofit housing providers, X number of affordable providers, and X number of social service agencies. If you have that very clear list, and I really am getting ahead of my report, you need to know what their objectives are. And so that can be included in a bit of a small survey, nothing huge. They will say they're interested in housing, but not all of them want to become housing developers or housing owners. What they may want is access to a few units for their clientele, but we don't know that specific need. If you do the, what do you want out of housing? What is your capacity? And do you have any equity to contribute to a development alongside your land mapping? Then you will quickly find out who really is interested. There were a lot of people that got involved in the Hamilton is Home Collaborative initially. When you drilled down, there were only 4 organizations that really wanted to develop additional housing. The rest wanted to partner in and get a few units here and there. But without doing that deep dive, we wouldn't have known that. That quick survey mapping will give you good footing to then hold the information sessions and make the proper links that you need. But you need to start with that list of who you are aware, provide support services, who's in the nonprofit business, and what their goals and objectives are and their capacity to reach those goals. That little bit of information fills in a lot of pieces in your puzzle. Thank you. And I will talk more when I get to my report about that.
Yeah, you're giving us a prelude. You're tantalizing us. Kevin, any response to that? There's some good ideas there.
Oh, certainly. And thanks, Lorianne. Absolutely. We do have a fairly good relationship in Brantford. We have a fairly small group of nonprofit providers and support agencies, and we are in dialogue with them. And we do know that a few of them have expressed interest, including Andy with Haudenosaunee, who's participating in the call today. They're interested in redevelopment. Certainly, Laurie has expressed that from JC Homes as well. We have those ongoing dialogues, and we would certainly include those existing nonprofit interests in our mapping exercise moving forward, for sure.
Okay, thanks, Lorianne. Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before I even get to my point, please let me offer my congratulations to everyone who was involved in that Marlene Avenue project. I've been following it in the media, and what a fantastic example of creating housing to fit a need. And I was very, very impressed by that project. So congratulations to everyone who made that happen. I think we have an opportunity to make everyone, including the public and the prospective partners, more aware of our intentions by creating some kind of a visual that could it basically illustrate, and I apologize because I'm repeating a bit of what I said at our last in-person meeting, but you know, this I picture this as a spectrum with different needs, and at one end of the spectrum, there's a need to transition people from homelessness to find some type of home, whether it's home ownership or another version of a home. And on the other end of the spectrum, there may be opportunities to there's need to provide housing for seniors. Again, whether it's ownership or rental. But I think we could benefit from having a little bit more general understanding communicated to our both of our municipalities on what we're trying to do, and within some kind of a visual of this spectrum, we can take that and turn it into, we are seeking partnerships at different spots on this spectrum, and it you start to think of it almost like a three-dimensional chessboard. But I just think there's an opportunity to communicate where we're heading. So that's just some food for thought.
Yeah, I'd say this, Councillor House, I tend to agree with you, because there's always a need to gain community acceptance for any development. And a lot of that is dealing with, let's call it, preconceptions as to what it looked like based on something that might have been done in the 1960s. And that's important to deal with. I guess you could call it NIMBYism, but I say more about, it's about accepting. And I think people accept that there's a really large need for different types of affordable supportive housing. And I think the population, residents, are generally accepting of it, but they really want to know what it is, what's it look like, and what's the impact going to be, and the concepts that are being developed, I think hopefully many neighbors would find acceptable. Yeah, but you're right, you got to deal with that and develop support for whatever it is you're going to do for any particular property. Mary Ellen, our housing, where'd you go, Mary Ellen? There you go.
Sorry, I think Kevin has responded to the mapping exercise in terms of additional information from housing providers. So again, we are reaching out to housing providers. That is and will be part of our mapping process, as well as other support services. So we will be working towards those things. A little earlier, there was a question about the land, so I just wanted to respond to the city-owned lands that we are mapping. There are many models out there that could in fact help support this group, such as in-kind contributions from the municipality to access funding, or there are other models whereby the city holds on to that land for a number of years, and yet a supportive housing provider might want to partner and build on that land. So there are those options available. All I just wanted to add.
Right. Mary Ellen, you should have introduced yourself. I mean, you've become famous with the Marlene Ave development, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Mary Ellen McClellan, Director of Housing.
Thank you. And that's housing that we're doing for both the city and the county. So, Graham from Indwell.
I was going to ask, is it appropriate if we put a notice on our Facebook page asking anybody who might have some land available to get in touch? We've got quite a Facebook following with Indwell, and sometimes things come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I hate to talk about, well, back in my day, but back in the early 1990s when nonprofits were very popular, I recall there was a parish here in town that when the reach out was made, they actually thought to themselves, yeah, we've got some excess land here, and it became a nonprofit housing development. But someone had to plant the seed in their minds that opened their mind to, we've got land that just lying fallow, and let's do something with it. So I'm hoping we can do something, we'll hear at our next meeting, something a little more organized in terms of that reach out. But in the meantime, there's nothing wrong, I would say, Graham, with that social media reach out that each of us can do through the various methods and social media outlets we have.
Okay.
Because you're right, sometimes it comes out of the woodwork. An organization just surprises you that will tell you that, yes, they're interested and like to do partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else would like to speak to this, or yes, Don Leah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just raising a question about the social media aspect of it. Should it be the same message that goes out on all avenues? Should we create one post and give it to everybody to share?
That's an excellent question. And Kevin, any thoughts about that, or Mary Ellen? I mean, we have a city communications department that does these kinds of things for us. We could create, so long as we've agreed, so long as the subgroups agreed on the message, right? I think it would be quite possible for us, communication department, create a post that could be used and shared. Am I speaking out of turn, Kevin or Mary Ellen?
Nope, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the group. We can certainly speak to its communications about that and work on some common messaging and make it succinct and positive, and that way it can be a common message shared amongst everyone through their social media. That'd be great.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion Graham made. So do you think we could have that done before our next meeting, or would you prefer we wait till the next meeting, or what's, I realize I'm putting you on the spot because
I certainly, Mr. Mayor, I think time is of the essence. I think we all know that, that we need more housing and we need it as soon as possible. So through Lori, who I know is listening in, we'll contact communications and start working on that messaging.
Great, thanks. And then sharing it to the rest. So Councillor House, see your hands raised again.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on that note, if it would be possible to connect your communication department with our communication department, so it ends up being kind of a joint message, cooperatively produced, that might carry well with all residents.
Be happy to do that.
Yeah, certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is the Mayor's Plural Housing Task Force, so absolutely.
Yes. Milan from MPP Will Boma's office.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The province will be happy to end the social media posts as far as and as wide as the committee asks. So you can count on us, okay?
Great, thanks. Anybody else would like to speak? Push that raised hand button. So yes, Graham.
Just to confirm then, I was just thinking about sort of like a generic, hey, we're looking for opportunities in Brantford and Brant County. Anybody want to get in touch with us as part of our community effort? Just feel free to get in touch. Should I wait to send something like that out until I hear back for the joint sort of posting, or?
Well, I think Councillor Howes made a good point about consistency whenever you're trying to market something is critical.
For sure, yeah,
right.
For sure.
And so I think we can, actually I see Mr. Hutchings, the CAO, would like to chime in here. I suspect he would like to add something to this.
So yes, I can. I think we could probably, I'm looking, I see Michael Bradley on there. We've done a lot of these in the mornings with the EOCs, and we've done a lot of joint stuff. But maybe I'd like to take it offline with Maria, our communications person, work with Kevin and Mary Ellen, circulate to this group, and we can send it out through our various, once we kind of come up in between the meetings, we can figure this out, circulate it out, and then get agreements, and then have us all pump it out through our social media channels. So I'll take that away, and it's a very similar approach that Michael and I do in the mornings with the EOC, the Unified EOC, with the public health and the hospital as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchings. So with that, Kevin, just to summarize, Kevin O'Hara, that we'll be doing that, and then also in advance of the next meeting, I assume you'll be getting out to us some material regarding that mapping and what that looks like from the city and the county. So that when we come to our next meeting, we'll have had it beforehand and can talk about what's there.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So let's move on to the item 4.12. And that's the financial options team. Mr. Hutchings, you're going to report to us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I somehow I was voluntold to be the chair of this. I think Michael Bradley nominated me, I think. So thank him for that.
Yeah, but you didn't say no.
So I will say this up front to the members of the committee. I'm an accountant background, but also worked in social services and for many years. But I am looking at this from a municipal perspective. My filters are municipally. So when we speak about these things, I know a number of people are not-for-profits on this, as well as private sector. If there's any other ideas, I'm looking this through, my expertise is a municipal lens. And you see something alternative than what we're speaking about, please speak up, and we'd love to explore a little further. But I'll give you an update of the Finance Committee. There was a meeting on March 11th. We've had 2 meetings in between these meetings. One was just a really introductory one, talk about leveraging assets, existing assets we have, remortgaging existing stock, those sorts of things. It's been the media looking at. We've sold some assets such as Aerodale and looking at the proceeds of that and how that could lever. And as most people on the phone realize, it's just not a one-for-one relationship. You just don't take a certain amount of dollars and then throw it in. There is debts people pay. It's like any other house. There's rents you're receiving that help pay for those mortgages and those debts. And so $1 leverage is probably another almost 400-fold of other monies. So job and overviewing that. I can't say it enough. We talked about 506 units, and now we built Marlene Ave. We're down to 476. So kudos to everybody in this committee. We're already chipping away at the 50.
I think what we'll do,
Oh,
so
I'm back
Mr.
on.
Hutchings, we lost you completely. There.
Am I back? I'm back on though, I think now.
Yes, you are back on.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'm not sure. I think I was just talking about the local housing corporation when I went off. And so I think what the people have to realize in 2003, when the local housing corporation was transferred over to the municipality, it was set up as a one share capital. Municipality owns it actually, the difference, not a not-for-profit. So we are looking at that, using that as a shell to possibly, it doesn't affect the municipal debts limits. We were to meet today at 1 o'clock, and it's my fault, so I had to cancel. I had a death in my family, so I was just at visitation earlier. So we are reconvening, and we're going to look at debt limits the municipality has, look at using this corporation as a possible lever to possibly, can we borrow and use monies? Can we remortgage some of our properties that have been paid off? And those sorts of things to kind of find some flexibility. Can we partner with the private sector? I know when I was at Brock University, we did a lot of this. We partnered with a lot of private sector developers, as well as not-for-profit developers for student residences, not for social housing. But those are some of the things we're looking at, and we're going to sit down today with Joelle, myself, and Kevin, and a few others. We're going to look in Mary Ellen. We're going to look at opportunities to kind of just play around with some numbers and see what we come up with and try to bring something back to this committee. We should have something though, Mr. Mayor, well in advance of the August meeting, and some ideas what we can do from a municipal perspective, but we are trying to find other levers for the private sector and the not-for-profit sector. Brad Smith, who's not on the phone, gave us an update on all the housing grants, and there's numerous ones. And I think we have to also be aware that I think we have to be at the ready. All my intelligence that I'm hearing from my people that I know in Ottawa telling me that there's some kind of bumps in the road right now, but they are ready. There's monies at the ready to, there's bumps in the road between the province, not just Ontario, but some of the other provinces and the federal government, that their federal government has monies ready to launch for a lot of capital programs that they'd like to get moving within a year, have them done in a year. So there is infrastructure dollars coming very quickly to try to reinvigorate the local economy.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is, sorry, should have put that in silent. So there's so Marlene Ave, that type of a project, pretty much funded through provincial and federal grants, a contribution that was made by the city of Brantford for the capital costs, the operating costs shared through the city and the county. So let's call that a traditional city build. It could be a supportive housing such as we see at Marlene Ave. It can be a senior citizens residence. It could be Indigenous focused. It could be focused more to singles or families. But that's one model. Is there another model then that a city can consider that's, let's say, as you said, a partnership type model where it's not necessarily being built by the city, but the city becomes a partner either because it provides land or it provides some money or contributes to it? Is that being looked at?
Yes, that will be looked at. Again, through my background, I know there is some, again, through the private sector and municipalities, there is some things where there can be corporations set up and there could be, you need 19.9% ownership and the shares to, lever the municipal tax portion, as well as lever the private sector side. As well as I know a lot of people on this call right now that who are housing providers in the not-for-profit sector also know there's other avenues too, where there is grants that not-for-profit sector can get, which the municipal can't get, and vice versa. And so there's partnerships as well in that sector.
Yeah, and is a rumor that I'm hearing about CMHC that a lot of that federal government money may be flow through CMHC? Are you hearing the same thing?
That's what I've been hearing, yes.
Right, and so that the CMHC would provide financing. It could be, say, a nonprofit type development or something in that line. And what I'm hearing is that CMHC is looking at financing those kinds of developments that have a big component of affordable in them. Even private development projects where I think they're looking for a commitment on an affordable piece. So those are the rumors I'm hearing. So
Teresa may know more, Mr. Mayor, being with the federal government. I'm not sure I'm going to call her out, but I'm not sure if the federal government knows anymore.
I wish. I wish I had that inside information.
Okay.
So questions, comments? Push the raised hand button, please. You're going to disappoint Mr. Hutchings if someone doesn't ask him something or contribute something. Joe Muda, Joe from Manager of Development Planning.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. Sorry about the whole internet connection here being unstable. But I'd like to ask Graham Cubitt of Endwell. Like I'm aware of Hamilton having passed a community improvement plan with respect to housing. Have you taken part in any of that, and has it been effective at all? If you could answer that, that'd be helpful for us.
So we have not participated in the community improvement plan yet per se. In terms of the projects that we've had on the go, we do work closely with the municipality to sort of leverage whatever resources are available. Investment in affordable housing, social infrastructure fund, the national housing strategy now, of course, sort of replacing some of those programs. The co-investment fund we've had on a couple of projects, I think 3 projects, 2 of which have already been funded. There are some emerging, somebody was talking about the new things that CMHC may be coming out with, whether it's sort of pandemic related or there's sort of an emerging conversation about a new stream within the national housing strategy related to supportive housing. no word, like no specific framework on that, sort of rumors at the moment. But I think being prepared for something or even suggesting a project might help CMHC say that's a good idea. There is a certain level of complexity to working with CMHC. And I think having the support from our local MP obviously would make a big difference in helping navigate that, navigate that complexity. But when we do have a good relationship with CMHC and are talking about projects across a number of municipalities and helping them realize that there's options out there, opportunities out there. I think that the other thing is that, I mean, COVID obviously has changed the course of all of our lives in one way or another. There is a growing awareness, and I would be interested in hearing sort of the specific sort of situation in Brantford, but that the congregate living model, sort of the emergency shelters, like how to protect people in a pandemic from exposure, really is very difficult, and what might be new options related to sort of replacing that model. I think there's room there to sort of go back to the province, obviously, which is a very keen interest in not repeating the expenses of sort of the emergency responses related to the pandemic. So I think that there's some new opportunities potentially to work closely with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Community and Social Services. That's not specific because it's not like a new program is being announced or something, but as the community responds to the specific needs that we have, that we've experienced due to the pandemic, there'd probably be, I know in our connections with the Ministry of Health and other communities, those things are top of mind.
Thanks, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Graham. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just reinforcing the timeliness of all of this. Like this task force was already gaining some momentum. Then we were sidetracked by COVID a little bit, at least delayed for 3 months. But now we may be rounding a corner into a time of opportunity, and the better we can have something mapped out, so to speak, in order to take advantage of any funding opportunities, obviously the better. I think it's, as was mentioned earlier, if we can have 2 or 3 kind of case studies of the next Marlene Ave type project, whatever it is, kind of in our back pocket, ready to pull out when the opportunity presents itself, the sooner we can do that, the better. Thank you.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. Natasha.
Hi. I just wanted to speak to what Graham was saying about the and the impact of COVID, and it is different on different shelters. So for those who don't know, I'm the executive director at Nova Vita, and COVID has had a tremendous impact on our congregate living setting here. We are fortunate in the way that our bedrooms are set up. Most of them have their own bathrooms, but not all of them. So that's one way that we've been able to manage in a COVID setting. But when we're talking about and what that looks like, I know that the Good Shepherd Women's Services in Hamilton, when they built their new shelter in, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, they have independent units within the shelter system. So their own kitchens, their own living rooms, their own bathrooms, but then there's also a congregate area as well for, group program interacting and whatnot. So it's hard to believe that our building, which is only, 20 some odd years old, is already perhaps becoming dated. But when we look at COVID and the fact that we had to reduce our occupancy rate in order for us to have safe ways for people to interact, like Graham said, it's you start to think about, what it could look like instead. So anyway, so I just wanted to share that with folks. If anybody was curious about, you know, what was happening in the shelter system. And then the other piece too is, like I said, at Novita, we're fortunate. There's other homeless shelters that don't have that luxury either. They have to share bathrooms. And again, that is a risk when it comes to COVID. And so you've probably seen in the paper that we've had to use hotel rooms and whatnot in order to physical distancing. But again, that's going to be a financial toll. And we don't know how long this COVID situation will last or when there's going to be other sort of resurgence. So yeah, just food for thought in terms of that continuum for housing and sheltering.
Thanks, Natasha. Mr. Hutchings, did you want to?
Just as a comment, and it's not to put Milan in any hot seat or any, but and it's not it's meant to be free fall comment. Back to what Graham said and Natasha just said, the one thing that's come out in the last 3 months, and there's going to be a special premier's task force on and things like that, is the issue in long-term care and then / congregate care, which we're talking about. Like, I just don't know if thinking about this, long-term care wasn't compared to what we have in shelters, where there's basically mattresses on the floor and people living pre-COVID, people sleeping side by side. And I think personally, I think they're going to up the game in long-term care homes. They're going to have to. It's not as much congregate situation, and I think we're all going to have to move up a step. And Natasha just said, you know, the building's only 20 years old, and all of a sudden it's out of date because we're all moved up a step in how people should live in congregate care settings. So is there, back to Councillor Weaver's comment, is there a continuum, not in homelessness or housing, but in congregate care setting, where some of these congregate care settings that may previously 3 or 4 years out be former long-term care homes become, you know, places like Marlene Avenue that have spaces that were formerly rooms for nursing homes now become rooms for people that need supports. I'm looking at upstream. The province wants to upgrade nursing homes. They may have to build some different ones now, and maybe there's room that we can move into, but it's probably a 4 or 5 year, maybe longer solution, which costs a lot of money for the province, but it's just something we should have on the long-term vision as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hutchings. I guess that your comments would start at this section. We'll end it. So now we'll move on to the mentorship program. And Lorianne, you gave us a teaser earlier, and so now it's your turn.
Thank you, Mayor. The real question is, was this report circulated for all of you, or do I have to read it? And I probably should know that answer, but didn't see the email. So our team, thank you to Dan and Natasha, Habitat for Humanity and Nova Vita Domestic. Natasha just spoke. We got together right after the last task force meeting and hit the floor running. You'll see that we summarized saying we had 3 recommendations going forward. And this was before I realized that the Inventories mapping group was only doing land. So our first recommendation is that the Inventories mapping exercise include a listing of all interested stakeholders as identified below, that an informational session be held for those stakeholders with a clear goal, vision, and the funding realities that are attached to it, and that a survey be conducted of those stakeholders that identifies their interest, identifies their own organization's goals and objectives with respect to housing, and provides a description of their current capacity, knowledge, and equity contribution capabilities. Somebody earlier mentioned there are grants that can be available to nonprofit organizations that may not be to municipalities, and that is true. At the same time, there is an expectation that that group will have to put in an equity contribution, and sometimes it's a pretty sizable equity contribution from our end. Those were our recommendations going forward, but we also provided you with a bit of the history of the discussion because it's actually not what you sent us out to do. You gave us specific questions and that's not what we came back with, so we had to explain to you why. It was explained to us going into this meeting that task force members thought that there were various faith groups and other agencies who want to either incorporate as housing providers or expand the scope of their existing nonprofit to also offer housing. And these organizations may not have the expertise they need, hence this mentorship group was formed. So we were tasked with 6 questions. What information does an agency institution need to know to become a housing provider? Could this information be developed into a package? Who might be interested in hearing, seeing this information? And who could reach out to the prospective agencies to arrange an information session? Who would present the information, and how could that be scheduled? If an agency identifies it is interested, how are they matched with a mentor organization? And what is the role of the mentor? How much time commitment would be offered, and what are the parameters? We had a really good discussion about all of that, but felt we were jumping a little bit without that base information, the results of our discussion. We figured we needed a little bit of information, additional information about the stakeholders in the area, and like I said, their capacity, their real long-term interest, etc., before we could adequately answer them. But so that we weren't a complete failure, we did try to answer and identify where we were missing the information. So question 1, and this one, I can tell you that I pushed our little group to really question, do we really know that those agencies or faith groups want to become housing providers, or do they want access to housing for their clients? There's a difference. Being an actual housing provider can be quite complicated. We have 70 some pieces of legislation we have to monitor, et cetera, et cetera. Do you really want to be the landlord, or do you want units for your clients? And we've often found that, for example, YWCA here in Hamilton said to us, we don't want to develop housing. We don't want to be a long-time housing provider, but we need housing for our women, and we need them where they can get support. So that's a partnership link. That's not making them a housing provider. There's a difference. So if they do want to become a housing provider, of course we could organize workshops on what it takes to become a housing provider, but we have to be clear that that's what their need is first. There's certainly a great deal of information already available on that. We would just need to tweak it to be Brantford specific. The question 3, there may be, it talks about, going back to question 3, who might be interested in hearing, seeing this information? There may be groups interested that we don't even know about. But I mentioned earlier, if you start with sort of an initial mapping and get what their objectives and capacity is, you can do, and then once you're organizing an informational session for that group, you can publicize it. And so that if there is somebody else who's interested in receiving the information that we didn't capture, that we weren't aware about, one advertisement may bring in people. As Graham said, opportunities happen sometimes when we least expect them. But again, I think you can get down to that message better understanding what they really need. And that goes back to the recommendation number 3, which is that survey of stakeholders and categorizing those things. Question 4, who would present the information and how could that be scheduled? There are so many options for presenters. Again, you have to tailor what is the message so that you can get right to the heart of that message. For scheduling, I did have a recommendation. You should always do whatever session you're going to do, you have to do it at least twice. Because you won't get people that are working. If you're doing a one-time day thing, you won't get those that aren't able to come. One day, one night, maybe over a weekend, but at least hold 2 sessions so that you get as many people as you would like. The question 5, if an agency identifies it is interested, how are they matched with a mentor organization? Again, that's alignment with the specific objectives to who can best deliver on those objectives. And without having that little mapping exercise done first, you really, really won't know that information to make appropriate matching. That said, I also put forward, or we also put forward the recommendation that don't reinvent the wheel if something already exists. And I just wanted to share with the group that Housing Partnership Canada offers a really, really good mentorship type of program where you say what your objectives and gaps are, and they will link you to an appropriate organization that says these are one of our strengths. They have a little catalog of organizations who can provide services and whatnot, and we'll link them. But easy enough to do if you know people's objectives. And then question 6 was, what is the role of the mentor and how much time? We confess that is the one question we didn't explore fully because it would be on ideas that were not yet fully formulated. So we circled back saying our conclusion is we need a little bit of additional information to really, really deep dive and keep moving this forward. How many current community housing providers are in the area? And I know Mary Ellen and Kevin both said they've already started working and they have a number of these pieces, so that's awesome. Our little working group just didn't have those pieces. How many social service organizations are there in the area and what are their area of focus? I mentioned YWCA for women, Habitat for Humanity will have a goal of housing, affordable housing. What are the goals of each of those missions so that you can properly link? Who are the other interested stakeholders, like the private developers and the building associations? Some of that you may well already have. Then you can either complete the survey and hold an information session or hold an information session and complete the survey. But those two pieces can go side by side. And that's where we left it. With respect to the material, we outlined some possibilities there. You could easily develop a series of workshops or consultations, so you want to develop housing. Here's what you need to know. We could easily pull those together and often with members of the community. Indwell has tons of experience. Hamilton East Gowanus and Victoria Park right now are partnering on a massive development of 256 units that we hope will cover various ranges in the housing spectrum, from affordable home ownership right to supportive, through the affordable rental to support housing. So really trying to hit multiple points on the range in one very large development that was too big for either one of our organizations to do alone, so we're partnering. And that was the end of our written report that was circulated to everyone and our recommendations, and I will leave it there. Thank you.
Lorianne, if I can ask you a question. So you've told us the need for specific information to complete the assigned task to your subgroup. If we can get that information to you fairly quickly, so you'll then be able to complete that task and report to us back at the next meeting. Is that what you have in mind?
Not necessarily complete the entire task, but we could outline further for you.
Right.
Suggestions about these, now that we've seen what the objectives are and who the stakeholders are, what types of workshops do you need, what kind of mentorship program might work, that kind of thing.
Right. So either Kevin or Mary Ellen are you able to confirm, be able to provide that information? Because we're the likely repository of most of it. Marilyn, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I sounded better on mute here, but no, in all seriousness, we will be doing, we can provide a component of that work. It's a lofty task to provide it very quickly, but we will start to reach out and gather some of this information for you, well, for all of us, as it will sort of help structure some of the media information that will go out as well. So I'm seeing that piece of work sort of helping this particular subcommittee, as well as helping the information that might go out on through some of our media releases. So we will be working on that very shortly.
Right. Yeah, because that information might prove beneficial to other subgroups. Yeah. Any questions or comments following Lorianne's presentation? Not seeing any. Thank you, Lorianne. So I'll now move on to item 4.1 for the joint application team and Graham. That's your presentation.
So thanks very much. We did meet back on the 28th of May and touch base on some of the things we were looking at regarding a joint application. I think some of the conversations so far in this meeting has pointed to the opportunity that we're waiting for is the proposal, the right site, the right project to actually come together and put together a joint application. So we have looked at some of the options. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities has a new sustainable housing grant program. There's 5 different streams available through that. It is stackable with CMHC, so there's some opportunity there. We are looking at the evolution of the CMHC programs with co-investment and other things. Seed funding, of course, is available. Seed funding is no longer available at the very beginning, sort of as the genuine seed of an idea, but it's more of like the proposal development funding used to be. So when an idea has come together, how to really move it to the next stage. So there's probably a little bit of work necessary to do to take an idea that we collectively come to or around a specific site and move it into a feasible program around which to put together a grant. But we're ready and able to do that as soon as we can identify a site. One of the things that has come on my radar since our meeting was there was a church that reached out and said that they might be interested in talking about their property, but I haven't heard back from them. I think just with the COVID situation, they're probably like everybody else, lots of things on their mind right at the moment. But I think that finding the community side of that might be interested in contributing to a project as well is an ongoing opportunity. And our experience has been that when you kind of do need to talk about a specific site or a specific program model or something before people really want to start donating towards something. But we're ready with the joint application team as soon as we can find a site to work through.
Great. Any questions for Graham? Brian Sibley.
Hi, Graham. Thanks for that. You actually had your comments here and Lorianne's previous comments. You both have reflected on the faith community and potential. I mean, there's a lot of land sitting in those communities. Your experience has probably been different, Graham. My experience, is that many organizations from the faith community, when they're approaching us too late. They're approaching us at a point of desperation when either the congregation's gotten small, the capital needs are so high, and they're looking for survival, and it's a challenge. And I'm thinking that maybe that is an opportunity there to be reaching out to the various dioceses at a much earlier date as a group to say maybe we should be pulling those groups to say that collectively, if we're soon enough, we can save congregations as well as create impact. When we leave it to, when small congregations in the last 3 or 4 years of their fiscal, their financial viability, it's really difficult. So, there may be an opportunity at some of the higher levels to actually reach out and talk to various, the dioceses and stuff to say, let's look at planning together to see how we can get the greatest impact from this land.
And
So
that's a good point.
Yeah, it is a good point. Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I literally just started writing, we should send letters out to those faith-based groups right away. That's an excellent idea. And I also wanted to circle back to finding a preferred site. So I know right now, the Shellard Lane site that we have, it's been for, I think it's set aside for senior housing. Can someone confirm that? Maybe Mary Ellen?
Yes. Certainly, Councillor Weaver. Yes, it is put aside for seniors housing, and that is, we're certainly looking at that, and we're looking at the expansion of potential units on that site. But it is dedicated to seniors with the offshoot of potentially remandating other stock.
Okay, perfect. So would a unit like that sort of follow the John Noble Home Apartment model for sustainability?
Mr. Mayor, yes, the intent of the Shellers Lane build will be to follow that particular style of build. I think the John Noble apartment certainly fits into the community and serves the need, and is sort of that, it sits on a piece of land along with the John Noble home and provides for that campus of care. There are current partnerships going on, and we see that the Shellers Lane new build might follow the same model. It would be a mixed income build to provide housing for anyone within the community at some point. It would also help to sustain itself. So we see that happening. We don't have a design specifically for that build, but we are in the process of putting that together. So we'll actually have a visual to look forward to in the future. We're looking for it to be modeled very much as like the John Noble apartments. However, we might be looking at a more cost-effective way of moving forward, such as a modular design. Still achieve the high number of units, make it a very high density build, but in fact, shorten the construction time and the cost as well, make it more cost effective.
So on the onset of that sort of investigation work, would this be an appropriate location for a joint application from this group to try to move that forward for our senior level of housing? That's definitely a need as well.
We would have to do further investigation on that piece. We're not yet at the stage where that particular area is we have the appropriate zoning for yet. So I know planning is working with us very closely to help us look at the number of units that particular property could support. So I'm not saying that isn't the spot, but I think it's a little bit further out. We could certainly look at that. There is still planning work to do in identifying what exactly could fit on that unit, on that particular piece of property. And we're only in the process stage now of grading that land. So it is further out. It might not meet the current grant requirements of getting in the ground and being shovel ready right away. But we are also looking at other avenues right now. We are looking at other pieces of land that we might be able to get into the ground more quickly. And there might be an opportunity for a joint project.
Thank you for that, Mary Ellen. So right now throughout the city, there are some developers that are sort of in their infancy with what they're planning. I'm thinking of the old Stelco building, again, in West Brant. That's been sort of sitting there for quite some time. Is there perhaps an opportunity for us to maybe approach one of those types of developers to see if we can partner with them? Because my concern is a build like that has taken a very long time. So I'm not sure if, maybe there's financial reasons why it's taking a lot of time, but that might be able to be a win-win where we're partnering with them, that helps them move forward, and then it provides some land for us to do the things that we really need to start doing.
Yes, there is an opportunity. We can certainly look at that. I think our starting point might be with working with planning and understanding what's happening. And we might be able to link with some of those developers in the very near future. I think we're trying to look at all avenues, but that's certainly something we can do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just prompted by Councillor Weaver's efforts to get into specifics, which I respect. I'll wave the Trillium flag again in Paris as one that's probably as ready to go as anything. And I'm just wondering if we're starting to put together packages to seek funding and confirmation of commitments, that kind of thing. Can we be looking at some combination of, the Trillium site, 1 or 2 sites in Brantford, depending on what's ready. And I'm just wondering at what stage do we start to get into these details?
So I can tell you this, Councillor House. So that our last Social Services Committee meeting, and just so that you know, Social Services, it's a joint committee of both the city and the county. It's a department, our Health and Human Services, it's embedded within the city as paramedics is into the county. Anyways, at our last meeting, we talked about Trillium Way, and there is an issue that between the city and the county we need to address in terms of the type of development this might be and the respective contributions the city would make and the county would make. We anticipate with the sale of Arrowdale that we're going to have monies available to expand the Shillard Lane development, also to potentially fund a project on Trillium Way. And as Mary Ellen told us, the new concept for municipal affordable builds has the municipal contribution primarily coming through the capital contribution, right, as opposed to sharing the operating cost, because like the John Noble Home Apartments, try and make them self-sustaining with a mixed income, some market rents, and you add into the mixed government grants and private financing as well. So I think the issue for the Health and Human Services Committee was, is the county interested in having that? And if it's not, then if it is, then we develop the specific concept, what it's going to look like, who it would serve, and try and move that fairly quick. Because I agree with you, that property's zoned. It's hopefully the money is going to be there fairly shortly, and kind of like we're at the starting line of that one. If not, then I think at the Social Service Committee, the issue was, all right, if the county's not interested, let's move on to the next project, wherever that might be. So I think we're waiting to hear back from at the Social Services Committee. Our next meeting, we're going to be talking about it again. So that's kind of where that one's at. But I agree with you. That could be a very exciting development for the entire area, and also for the county, in the sense that it's been a long time since there was a municipal build in the county.
If I may, it has been a long time, and hopefully we can map out the details. I'm conscious at the same time of the your Arrowdale scenario. I'm sure that the residents of the city of Brantford will want to see more units created in Brantford as opposed to Paris. So I'm very conscious of the optics of that. But I at the same time, I like the idea of progressing this into some specifics that we can sink our teeth into, right?
Yeah, because that hopefully would be the start of a better defined partnership between the city and the county, that with that one being the beginning of much bigger and better things in both the city and the county. So next would be Graham.
I would love to be a part of those conversations on those specific sites if I can be of use. And, I think just generally the comments that Brian made about the church community, the Anglican Diocese of Niagara has reached out to us and said, could they explore some sites with us? I'm realizing Brant and Brantford are in the Diocese of Huron, so I'm going to try to make some connections there at the diocesan level, and see what might be on their radar about properties. So I will follow up on that as well. I know that right now we're developing for Indwell, we're developing a sort of an assessment sort of tool that takes us through a fairly rapid sort of assessment process. It takes us about a week to look at a site and figure out what we could fit on there and come up with a reasonable program model based on our knowledge of the municipal affordable housing plans and general knowledge from other partners and things. If that's a tool that we could use on behalf of any of these sites, I offer that. Just in terms of the time is of the essence comments that were made earlier, just happy to sort of use whatever tools we might have at our disposal for this group.
Good. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just sort of linking back to what Mary Ellen said when she mentioned about modular as a possible exploration. We've been doing a fairly, along with Victoria Park Community Homes, been doing a fairly deep exploration of that. And what we found is that what you get is if you can replicate a project, you get cost savings through the replication. You also get accelerated revenue streams at the tail end. So I'm wondering if there's not an opportunity to start talking about having common standards. You know, if we're talking about common standards in design, common specs in design, because at that point in time, modular becomes a pretty cost-effective option for building. And also you get that accelerated revenue stream at the back end, because you can, I mean, we were looking at about a 7-month quicker build, right? The first building, you don't get those costs. Second, third, and fourth building, you start deriving those economic benefits. So just throwing it out there.
Good point, Brian. Any other discussion then on this item 4.14, the joint application? Seeing none, thank you, Graham. So I'll move into item 4.1.5, the industry partnerships team, David Prang.
Thank you, Kevin. We had a chance to meet again just before the COVID situation happened, probably a week or maybe 2 weeks before our meeting was going to happen. Graham and I met at the chamber office. We had regrets from Odette and John from Bria and the home builders. Not a really, it was more of a get to know you kind of thing, because with Graham being new into the community. One of the, I guess, the two tangible items I had coming out of the meeting was that, from a cost perspective, we're talking, somewhere around the neighborhood of about $300,000 per unit. So trying to keep that in mind from an overall perspective. And then the other piece that may impact the inventory analysis is the impact of and again, this is changed from that conversation, but the impact of the post-secondary community on within the city of Brantford anyway. And that's been during my time in that world, and now the amount of bed units that are taken up by the post-secondary students coming in, they're pushing some of that available affordable housing out and becoming student rentals. So with the growth plans of the post-secondary institutions, just to keep that in mind as we sort of move through this project, that there's going to be needs that are going to impact whether it's existing or future available square footage, and we have to sort of work with have their plans in mind as we look at finding sites to build on. But that was kind of the gist of our industry partner conversation.
Yeah, and so will there be, part of the purpose of that subcommittee was, what can the city or county do to, facilitate more affordable private ownership options?
I think that that was really its development charges. It's being quicker to approve, get rid of the red tape, and improve or incentivize. It's really an incentivization component, and that was I think we would have had a little bit more of a robust conversation perhaps over the course of the last month or so, but generally that's what we're hearing at the chamber is that the development charges and the pace at which stuff can get approved, and that there might be some inconsistencies between the pace available in the county versus the city, and or vice versa, depending on the type of project. And then the other challenge you could have, we hear this quite often at the chamber, is that you could have an engineer graduate from University of Waterloo, or two engineers graduate from the University of Waterloo. One person works for the city, one person works for the private developer, and they have two different opinions on the quality of a build, or the things that are required, or the interpretation of the Ontario Building Code. So some of those broader issues that impact the development community as a whole would also impact the affordable housing development.
Any questions for David? All right, thank you, David. So we'll move to 4.2, the Social Services Committee report, options to support affordable housing development. We kind of touched on it earlier, Councillor Howes, in our conversation. So Mary Ellen, what can you, I know we've been sent a report. That was the report, in fact, that came to the last meeting of the Social Services Committee.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. So just to move some of the issues along and to actually support this group, we did do a report and ask for some direction. This particular, as the mayor has indicated, has been to social services and will be further going to council on the 23rd of June. Just to support what was said earlier in terms of the need for affordable housing, we have identified, we already know that the Brant and Brantford waiting list is at an all-time high, but we're already seeing alarming trends that show us that that is going to increase substantially. We're only 3 months into our COVID crisis right now, and we're already seeing those signs. So this is a sort of a let's get ready to move forward. So we did go forward and ask for some direction, and subsequent to council approval, we would like to be able to move forward on supportive housing. We know that's a critical need. We all know Marlene Ave is up and operating, and it has, I think it's welcoming its 20th resident today. So we know that that's a great need, and we haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg. So we'd like to move forward first with supportive housing and going out and partnering with the community. So we are asking to move forward with an RFP, look at how that might work. We're investigating how that might work. So might be some contribution of land or other things, but we expect to move very quickly on an RFP to partner with a particular support agency to provide us some kind of a supportive housing build. So that might be something that we can move ahead very, very quickly. There's other components within the report, some more housekeeping type things that we need to do to move the affordable housing scale forward. And that's looking at potentially increasing our debt limit or moving affordable housing out of that debt ceiling. So we're looking at a number of ways to do that. And we've asked for that. We've asked for some further work to happen in that regard. Brian Hutchings mentioned earlier some of our innovative tools to increase capital. So I won't go into that in the interest of time. We're looking at perhaps remortgaging some of our current housing stock, which he has mentioned through the finance group. Also, potential to dispose of additional municipal assets that might support a higher density. We currently have properties that are not very are very low density, and maybe this is a time to perhaps dispose of those properties and ask at the bequest of council that some of those funds be perhaps given to affordable housing to develop more. So that's in the report. Also, we've heard a lot today, and this is just generating. We're looking at some of the capital builds that are currently in our builds for the next 10 years, specifically Shellards Lane, Trillium Way, and we're looking. We know that we did not maximize the number of units on those properties. Much of the reason was, of course, financing and cost. But if money were no object, which is never the case, but in the event we are able to raise more capital, able to partner with other agencies, able to access some good grants, we would be able to increase the build, thus creating much more affordable housing, potentially in partnership with others. So we're looking at that, and we're working very closely with planning to see what those particular pieces of land that we have identified in our 10-year capital plan, what they would be able to hold, what the zoning requirements would be, the height restrictions, and any other incumbents issues that might affect the builds. So again, we know what we wanted to build, but perhaps now's the time to look at this realistically and say, instead of those 34 units that we intended to build and wanted to build through our 10-year capital plan on Shellards Lane, perhaps we can increase that to 70 and really start drilling away at that need. We're also potentially putting together further reports around identifying land on the Mohawk Lake District, on the Mohawk Greenwich lands. Now there are other issues there. There is a plan that still needs to be completed, but assuming the Mohawk Lake District Plan is completed and it has a vision, and we know what their vision for redevelopment is, perhaps this is the time that we can perhaps identify some land on that particular site. And that might be an ideal opportunity for a great partnership. There is a lot of land there, and we're hoping that potentially council would identify a piece of property on that site, following, of course, once we know what the district plan will include and what the official planning zoning bylaw amendments might be, that and what they would permit on that land. We're also seeking to look at other components of land that are identified in the mapping inventories right now that perhaps might not support larger builds, but would be ideal to support very small builds. And we would like to be able to work with planning very closely to perhaps rezone those areas for more of a multi-residential build, so we could quickly get perhaps some modular units on some land. So those are some ideas that have been presented within this report. If indeed we are successful in rezoning a number of pieces of land, it doesn't have to be one build. It could be a potential partnership of several pieces of land, perhaps identified for particular client groups with different organizations offering support to their clients. So there's a number of good ideas that could happen through here, but we're looking at some housekeeping to move the process of affordable housing forward. So that's the sort of the gist of the report. Again, it will be going to council on the 23rd of June.
Right. So, Marianne, it was a great report. And it's just so that people understand the process. So that's a joint committee of the city and county that this came from. So it comes to city council next week for city council to approve that report. And then I assume it also goes to county council at some point. And then we're having another social service committee meeting. I believe it's middle of August, and not this second week of August.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. And so then that's when there'll be the follow-up to what was in this report earlier in June. So it's actually very exciting. I think it's telling us that there is much we can do with additional resources in partnership with the county and other partners as well. That's the idea behind the RFP. Frankly, when I read this report, I thought this is exactly some of what we've been talking about here at this very task force, and I was very pleased to see it. So, Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a few questions. So the first question is about the rezoning of those smaller parcels of land. So I know that's a public process where we're required to have a hearing under the Planning Act. Is there anything that would limit us from having that hearing where we discuss multiple pieces of property and rezone them all at the same time? Or is that something that's just not allowed under the Planning Act? I'm assuming Joe might be able to answer that for us.
Through the mayor to Councillor Weaver, I think the better option would be to individually make those applications. They are individual parcels of land, and there's probably different issues that go along with each one of those sites, and whatever resident or business owner in that particular area may not want to appeal all of them, but just one. So I think you're better grounded in making those applications individually, based on what I just said. I think looking at that concept, what I'm hearing here today, there's a lot of opportunity that council can do in terms of making a motion or resolution with respect to some of these city initiated type of rezoning applications. I think maybe the biggest bang for your buck is looking at some of those larger parcels that the city currently own. Like, we weren't tasked to look at all of those other support items or units that were kind of mentioned here today by Lorianne, but it was really just seeing, like, what are those, where's that low-lying fruit? What are those best options from a land use perspective? Which ones are basically ready to go? They can be serviced. And then, and this is where someone like Graham comes in with Inwell with regards to, like, do we need more density to make it viable rather than just building these 2 or 3 unit off types of units? So I think those are the types of things that Mary Ellen and Kevin and Lucy and myself have been discussing in some of our meetings. So I think that's the way that, you know, we should be leaning towards, is if you know, making those connections, and what Graham's saying with this joint process. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I know David mentioned something about DCs. Right now, housing for the city, like affordable housing units, they're exempt from development charges. In whole, like there's I think a 50% reduction procedurally for these types of applications as well from the city's end. That could be looked at too, in terms of, you know, not having, don't tell Lucy this, but not having any fees. But those are the types of things that can make things a little bit, you know, easier for an application to come in. And yes, I mean, the rules are the rules, but if you look at, like, say, for example, the Sydenham Pearl site, which is that brownfield site we currently own, the city currently owns, some of those lands are already designated for medium density type uses. So that's what I'm kind of getting at. We kind of narrow down, you know, those land use constraints, and what's the easiest one to maybe attack first.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Joe. I was just thinking of trying to speed up the process, again, to move these things forward as soon as possible. So if there is any type of assistance you need from council, whether it be a resolution to help move that type of zoning thing forward, I'd be happy to work with you to move that forward, Joe. So then my next question is actually in the report. It's an excellent report. The analysis section really does outline several different streams of processes we can follow to move this along. And again, if there is any type of language or resolutions that I can help move to tackle some of these, to get them from a report to actually you know, moving them forward, I'd be happy to do that as well. So if there's an opportunity to work with staff to talk about any of these, and I know, you know, our meeting's next week, so obviously timing's going to be tight, but if there's anything that we can move forward next week or in the, I think the July cycle, I'd be happy to do that as well.
Sorry, if I could, I just add one comment that I missed in the report. I do appreciate that building on smaller pieces of land is often difficult, as Joe has mentioned, in terms of zoning processes. But when we look at the full, and why we included it in the report, when we look at the full continuum of housing, there are often clients or individuals that do not do well in higher density builds. So we wanted to be able to have that full continuum with some potential partnership opportunities. There doesn't, when we talk about supportive housing, it doesn't necessarily always have to be a Marlene Ave type of structure. It can be partnering with an agency to provide those mobile supports to individuals that might not fit or deal well with higher density. Although I appreciate and totally agree, higher density is much more cost efficient. Economies of scales are there, and that's an easier build. Thanks.
So just if I could follow up, Mr. Mayor, with that. So when we're talking about the smaller parcels, what if we were to package them all together and hopefully to find some of those efficiencies with you know, a partner to develop those smaller parcels? So then we might get some consistency with design. If they can do it relatively around the same time, you know, we're saving money on equipment being brought in. Is that something that we could look at doing as well for some of these smaller pieces that we think will be a good fit for a case study home or something similar?
Through the mayor to councillor, I'd happy to answer that. Yeah, I think that's something that we could look at in conjunction with working with our colleagues in housing for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I jump in here if I can? I got my hand up. You must be on mute, or can you hear me? Okay. So,
Yeah, there might be some
Joe,
problem with.
yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Joe, to Councillor Weaver's question, with all these number of small parcels that Mary Ellen's talking about, number one, could we not look at those now? We're in the middle of the OP process, rather than going one by one by one over the next number of years. And could we not knowing what we know now about some of these small parcels we own, could we not put them in the OP process, which is going to be in October, and zone them in the official plan process, which can be approved in October, and that is our public process. There's been lots of meetings on that, and that can be done, and they can be labeled there rather than going one by one by one.
Through the mayor to Brian. Yeah, I think that's something that we are looking at with respect to the new OP. But once again, the new OP is not quite finalized yet, and there's still that potential for any type of appeal process. And then secondly, we don't have the land zoned, right? So in some of those cases, or those case studies that were mapped out this week or last week, some of those land uses, right, don't fall in with, like, let's say a triplex or a fourplex, but I think Mary Ellen's kind of referring to. So we still have the zoning to contend with, and we will be, as a city, looking at a more comprehensive rezoning exercise, but that's after the OP process. So it's probably another 2 or 3 years out anyway. So what I think we can do is look at that from an OP perspective in terms of those land uses. Definitely, we do have new housing policies that have been reviewed. We need to talk to, obviously, our consultants about how we proceed with that, our OP consultants, but that's definitely something we can look into. But unfortunately, it's still the zoning that's not compliant in some of these cases.
Just a follow-up, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Joe, and Mary Ellen and I had the fortune of visiting one of our local developers who's now building modular homes, and it is quite impressive. And I know we're looking at possible fourplex on a small kind of awkward lot in the city that the zoning doesn't work on it. It's disappointing because it'd be a lot more expensive to build than these modular homes. Basically, just truck them in and drop them in. So I think there's maybe some discussions with your general manager about how we do this in the future without, making the zoning more amenable to more modular homes, because this is a big issue in the community, and I think we need to find some sort of flexibility in the Planning Act and planning to make this happen, where we do have some small pieces, and we have local builders and local people that can supply this stuff. So we'll try to work on that away from the table and try to find out a solution.
Graham?
If it'd be possible to get a list of those smaller sites, I'd be happy to take a look at it in terms of like our experience on type properties and, et cetera. We're looking at a site in Hamilton right now. It's a sort of a Main Street corridor kind of property. We think we can get 32 units on it, where right now they're, it's just a couple smaller commercial buildings. So it's just depending on how you look at different sites. From experience, I'd be happy to take a look at that. I know Pam connected us previously to a site in Simcoe where we're getting 32 apartments in downtown Simcoe. And so those might be some different options depending on the property list that you have available there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that, Mary Ellen. So that brings us to getting towards the end of our meeting, but 4.3, approval of future meeting dates. And we had I'll admit that given COVID-19 over the last 3 months, the Housing Task Force slipped just because there are other priorities, but it's now back up, certainly to getting to the top of my personal agenda once again, as we deal with what I call COVID normal, and are now more used to, once we get through this initial stage, to how we deal with COVID and continue on our normal business changed as it is to deal with COVID. So I'd like to capture the momentum that recapture the momentum we had prior to the pandemic. And I think that's going to be either we're meeting monthly or bi-monthly. And I know we've got a big task list here for city staff in terms of getting information to the subgroups. My thinking is that at the end of July, given I'm sure some people, I know myself included, will need to take some time off to recuperate from the last 12 weeks. Probably, and we also have the Social Services Committee, that's the second week of August, I think. So I think it would make sense to have our next meeting probably a week or two after that Social Services Committee meeting. So I'm suggesting that the date would be a similar date as what we have, because this is what, the third Thursday, I think it is, of the month. So I'm suggesting that we have the next meeting would be about August 20th. And that would be after the Social Services Committee meeting. I think it would allow time for staff to get out some of the information needed by the subgroups. In the meantime, we'd be doing that PR piece anyways, the push out for interested parties. Anybody have any concerns about that? Want to suggest a different date or different timing? One, seeing the thumbs up. Michael Bradley, thumbs up. Brian Sibley. Yeah. So I'm not asking for a vote on it. I'm just, because we'll have to send out the invites on it. But that's what my thinking is. So I don't see anybody asking something different. Good. So that one last item to deal with are the minutes of our last meeting. If I could have a mover to approve the minutes of our last meeting. Moved by Councillor Howes, seconded by Teresa. Any discussion in respect to the content of the minutes? I don't see any requests. So anyone opposed to approving the minutes? I see no hands raised, so they're approved. We have no resolutions. There are no notices of motion. So I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned, and thank you once again. And we've got the work cut out for us, myself included, through the summer, but I think it's going to be, I can see us coming out of August. I'm hoping with a clear direction on where we want to go. And I think it'll be exciting times. And I think underscore what Mary Ellen said, I'm seeing it as well, that with COVID-19 and the wind down of certain programs, whether it's mortgage protection or whether it's a CERB benefit, I think we're going to probably see in the fall, the real impact of COVID-19. And I think it's going to be challenging. So it's great we've already got this committee formed, that hopefully we can be there and already have in place certain strategies to deal with what I'm sure is going to be a much greater demand for affordable and supportive housing. All right, so with that, I wish everybody a good weekend, a good July, making sure you've got time out for those subgroup meetings. All right, thank you.